Hi everyone, welcome back to Japanese Politics 101. In our series, we talk about Japanese politics, what makes up Japanese politics in a kind of a hierarchy. Today we're going to talk about the bureaucracy, how it runs the country, how it is engaged with the citizens of the country, and how it interacts with the local politicians. Michael, you've been watching this?
Well, the bureaucracy is something that you can't help but watch because it's omnipresent.
You know, one of the things that people always complain about when they come to Japan is, gosh, there's a rule for everything here. How come everything is so managed? How come we can't do everything and we have to fill it out by paper and we have to submit it to the ward office?
Well, the opposite of that is, well, what do you want instead? Complete anarchy? And that is the line that the bureaucrat will always tell you. What is it that you want instead of us? And what they represent in Japanese life in general is we represent stability. We represent regularized processes. We represent everybody has to do the same thing. So we represent an equality across society. What would be your alternative?
Right.
Patronage, you pay under the table, you get things done via shady deals. What is your alternative? And the bureaucracy always says, when you come back, you're going to come back to us.
Right. You know, in a lot of countries and cultures, being a bureaucrat has a negative connotation. But in this country, it is like a core of how society is run and how it's managed. You can't live here very long and not escape the kind of centrifugal force that pulls that in.
You could point it out just simply in the terms of what is the most desirable outcome for a child's life. The various education companies that do education for elementary school students interview 6-year-olds every year. What is it that you want to be when you grow up? And boys usually say soccer player, but recently last year they said a scientist with a PhD. Girls of 6 usually say something like, I want to be a pâtissier, or I want to be a nurse, or something like that. But these companies then ask the parents, well, what do you want your child to be? And every year, for the 30 plus years that these companies have been doing the survey, every time number one is public servant.
Right.
I want my child to be a bureaucrat. Because that is a stable and high status and also very much respected position.
Right. It's almost a guaranteed career, isn't it?
It's a guaranteed life, but not only is it stability, you are a part of a long tradition, going back all the way to the beginnings of Japanese government back in the 6th, 7th century. You are part of a tradition of people who have the national interest and the local interest in their interest, and that they are self-sacrificing. They don't get paid very much, though they are a steady job that they know will be there, and they get a nice pension.
It's a nice package afterwards.
And they get housing allowances, but they're never terribly wealthy when they're in their positions, and even afterward, they don't get to, clean up in terms of getting all kinds of nice amakudari, descent from heaven positions. They're comfortable, but they're not absolutely outrageous. This is some part of Japan that is still highly respected even after years of scandals that have sometimes rocked the bureaucracy. And even during this period of time, we're seeing some bureaucrats getting tarred with the brush of being either corrupt or simply incompetent, but it doesn't reflect on the entirety of the bureaucracy.
Right. It would appear that since the bureaucracy is kind of in everything, that it's this massive thing that's involved in all aspects of society, but in fact the numbers don't reflect that.
Not at all. Japan is one of the least governed places in terms of the number of bureaucrats per 1,000 people. The only place with fewer ones is South Korea. It turns out that Japanese being well-mannered and being very famously polite, that makes it easier to run them so that you do not have to have so many public servants.
Right.
The numbers are very, very low. Nevertheless, they are very powerful. And there's almost a direct correlation between well, it would be, I guess it's an inverse correlation between the numbers of officials and their powers. Because you are of an elite, and you have to take an examination to get into the bureaucracy, sometimes 2 or 3, in order to just get a bureaucratic position, even a low-level one. You have to pass exams. You are a part of a select group that is self-denying. They don't pay themselves a lot of money. You are respected in your society, and therefore you don't have to be numerous. And they aren't. There are about 300,000, I think now, civilian employees, and then there is the self-defense forces. Now, the self-defense forces in most countries, the armies and navies, are a special class, soldiers and sailors. But due to Japan's constitutional issues having to do with renouncing war, the self-defense forces are actually listed as special bureaucrats.
Right.
You know, they are special public servants, and that has certain spin-offs from that. But nevertheless, when you get down to it, including the SDF, in terms of national officials, a very, very low number. Now, that's not to say that there aren't a lot of non-national, that is to say prefectural or local bureaucrats. There are. Most of Japan's government is, in fact, on the local level. But the same rules apply. You have to go through an examination. You want to be the librarian at your local library, you have to pass the librarian's test, you have to pass the national service exam. You have to do all these different things in order to get to this status.
Right. And
the bureaucracy is there always to provide a regular service that people can rely on. They may not like it. They may not like having to file 6 different pieces of paper or 25 in order to start a business.
And there aren't many variations of vanilla, are there?
It's just one set of rules for everybody, with very little input. Now, do the politicians have control? Yes, in 2 ways. The first is the budget. They get to vote on what the bureaucrats get to do. And the bureaucrats have to, in some ways, deal with the reality that some politicians want in their districts certain projects that probably should be somewhere else, but you'll make sure that the paperwork says it has to be in so-and-so's district. So that's where we're going to build this facility. And here's
because it's not only is it rule-based, but it's also top-down.
Yeah, the politicians are nominally in charge, and that has been reinforced since 2014. Mr. Abe is incredibly lucky in that previous administrations built up the momentum for the passage eventually of reforms of the personnel laws, so that under the 2014 personnel law, the responsibility for the careers of the very top level from each ministry, about 600 of the very top level officials, are all in the hands of basically the chief cabinet secretary.
That has become a powerful institution.
And then you can know, then at least Abe can know, and Mr. Suga, the chief cabinet secretary, can know that this top level of bureaucrats will not be undercutting them, will not be leaking material to the press, will not be working against them because they can take retribution upon their careers.
Right.
That didn't exist before, or at least it existed only in limited fashion prior to 2014. So Mr. Abe presides over what is, for really, politicians in charge for the first time. Prior to that, bureaucrats largely worked in terms of their own ministry's interests, in terms of their own long-term interests, but also with an ability to say to politicians, you come and go. One election you're in, one election you're out. We're the permanent institution
Very
of
dedicated,
government.
patriotic.
And we
represent the country.
We serve the country. You serve your constituents. It's a slightly different situation, sir.
Right. Another characterization is that there is no revolving door here in Japan.
Absolutely not.
People don't come into work for the government and then come out and work for private industry.
It works both ways. The people who are in the bureaucracy, if they leave the bureaucracy, there's almost zero chance that they'll ever come back in again. So that's a big change for them. And usually it only comes by force, when they're forced out because there are not enough positions at the top levels.
Or they did something.
They did something, but very rarely is that the case. The second thing is that the number of appointed positions that the politicians control, that the prime minister controls, are tiny. He can appoint the minister for the cabinet. He can appoint 1 or 2 vice ministers, or sometimes 3 parliamentary vice ministers. But that's it. Below that, in the government, it's all career bureaucrats.
And there's a real tension there sometimes, isn't there?
But the thing is that there's such a tiny veneer on the top of political appointees.
You want us to do what?
Yeah, it's not going to. There is really no way that there's going to be a lot of top-down in terms of the ministries. And indeed, most of the time, it's been bottom-up. Basically, for the longest time, it didn't matter who was minister of any ministry, because the people in charge were the bureaucrats who were the permanent institution. And indeed, if the minister was rotated out every year, and indeed we had cabinet reshuffles every year, it didn't matter. That person was a figurehead, or sometimes even a ward. It was very famous that when Aso was foreign minister, they would let him read manga all day in his office and not bother him with international affairs questions.
In front of the TV, please read this, sir.
Yeah, and then yes, Mr. Minister, take this.
Yes.
And,
you did a great job, sir.
Sir, you're wonderful. You can go take your nap now. Seriously, it was babysitting for many of the bureaucrats. That's not the case now.
Right.
It's a much more active and much more top-down sense. But even so, the bureaucracy still retains that ability to resist. It's weakened, and we clearly have seen that in the scandals, the so-called sontoku scandals, involving particularly the Ministry of Education, but even the Finance Ministry in the case of the Moritomo Gakuen scandal. We have Sagawa, the head of the tax division, who is the opposition is asking, bring this guy back into the Diet to explain his perjured testimony, because he told lies for you, Mr. Abe. We want him back. And Mr. Aso, who's the head of the finance ministry, says, if it's not a tax-related issue, you can't talk to the head of the tax division. That's never happened, and all this nonsense that they're putting out. So a bureaucrat, under these new rules of 2014, the chances that bureaucrats will indeed be engaging in activities that are merely there to buff up their reputation with the big man on top is certainly a change that has happened in the bureaucracy for the worse.
Right.
So a long time it was the politicians don't have enough power. The politicians are the elected representatives of the people. They are fighting against this permanent entrenched set of self-interests. Well, now it's now it's different. And actually, people think, wow, the old way wasn't so bad.
Right. Let's talk about it on the national level. There are 11 kind of conglomerated ministries and several agencies that make up not only just the cabinet, but also just the administration under the prime minister.
And there are career and non-career members who are inside the ministry. The career ones, of course, are very, very associated with the interests of that ministry and not necessarily with the national government. There were a lot of reforms in order to break down. Well, first they amalgamated. You're right. They had many, many more ministries. So
there were 22 or 23,
and there are lots of them, and each one was a silo. And so it was a two-part process. First, put together ministries that will fight amongst themselves. Take the construction ministry and glom it together with land, infrastructure, transport, and put it all into one MLIT giant ministry and let them fight it out. That discord will weaken them and give the politicians greater strength. That was the first stage. Then stage 2 was the reform of the top-level appointment system so that you could keep a track, at least at the top. What's going on below, of course, like any bureaucracy, there are hotshots who have great ideas, who use the bureaucracy in order to promote their ideas and build coalitions within their ministries in order to put an idea out so that it gets funded in the budget, and then people follow that person, and eventually that person, because of the followers that he or she has amalgamated through time, gets pushed up and survives as one of the survivors, because the bureaucracy does not have, it's a pyramid. It gets narrower and narrower. There are fewer and fewer positions at the top. And since it's a career, everybody moves up at the same time. So there's the class of 53, the class of 57, and they all move up. But if there are not enough positions in the next level, some of them have to go out.
Right.
And that's the source of the very famous amakudari, descent from heaven, because there's always, with every generation, when they get promoted, some folks are just not good enough. They didn't compete enough. They didn't have the ideas enough. Let's find a think tank, a sad sack company, a university that will take them as an adjunct professor so that they don't, they're not completely destitute, but there's no place in the government left for them.
Right. Being a minister of one of these ministries must be a really tough job because it's not just a singular silo. It could be 2 or 3 or 4.
That's right, and the institutional memories can go way back and separate them out. And there is, again, some ministers are able to manipulate the various jealousies very effectively, or at least pick up on who's where. Now, it should be said, and we really have to hammer this home, that the bureaucracy is not pure as fallen snow. They're human beings like anybody else, and they're thinking about their long-term interests. And that's where we get the sources of the iron triangles of
scratching backs,
where within a ministry, you know that there's going to be a career bureaucrat, and that person is going to go up. So,
and you also know that there are amicudati spots that are kind of waiting for somebody to circulate in.
Yeah, so there's the one pole is the bureaucracy, and that person you can rely on being in a position to make rules, change rules, provide subsidies through the budget, whatever. So politicians out here say, I'm going to have a long-term relationship.
Groom that relationship
all those years. And then the third pole, of course, is corporations who offer these amicudati positions, have these spots, these sinecures for these bureaucrats if they get kicked out. And the bureaucrats, of course, some of them are senior to other people in their that are left in the ministry, and they can always make a call on behalf of that business saying, I know so-and-so, I know Tanaka who's in the division, I'll call him. I was in the bureaucracy before he was.
They all went to the same schools.
Right. Yes, indeed. Tokyo University Faculty of Law is the basic training ground. It was designed that way, so it's not unusual that. Why are there so many Todai graduates? Well, that was the reason why Todai was established. The Tokyo University is to create bureaucrats, and even today, 1/4 of every entering class of bureaucrats, 1/4 come from Tokyo University. And then the next one is Kyoto University, Waseda, Keio. And with those few schools, you've basically got most of the bureaucracy. The rest of the bureaucracy comes from a very, very, very very large number of smaller schools, and they don't have the ability to organize. And that's the last thing is the gakubatsu.
It's a pecking order, isn't it?
The Tokyo University guys and gals are on the fast track, and they look out for each other, and they see each other as a mutually.
And that's why the parents fight so hard to get them into Todai in the beginning.
That's correct, so that they can be part of this faction within the government that is the most powerful faction. Tokyo University graduates look out for each other, they're wary of each other, they're always aware. And the other universities, they're there, but they're never going to be top-notch. And it's very hard, it's almost impossible for someone who even passes the test, has great marks, has great ideas. If that person is in Tokyo University, most likely person will never be vice minister and will never get up to the top spot. It's all Tokyo University at the top, but that's the way the system's designed.
Right. One of the interesting things is that they have agencies in addition to ministries. And the defense ministry used to be a defense agency. That means that they didn't have a person sitting within the cabinet. Now, it became a ministry recently, but the interesting thing is that the police agency, which is probably bigger than what the defense agency is, doesn't have a top cop. It's still an agency status.
Yeah, there are all kinds, and for the defense ministry, when it became a defense ministry, you say, wow, they got to change the stationery, a big deal. And they have this magnificent, great complex.
It is it's right down the street.
Yeah, and from where we are right now, but it was getting to be a ministry, that status. And the police have a chip on their shoulder, and a lot of other agencies have a chip on their shoulder because of the status that comes with being a ministry bureaucrat.
Right. Studying the Japanese bureaucracy is an important component of understanding how this society and how politics works in Japan. We're going to continue to delve into this, and you should too. Please stay tuned.